Hi guys, just wanted to take the time to provide the presentation that I did on behalf of Talis for what was a very successful Energy from Waste or Waste to Energy, depending how you want to call it, but the National Energy from Waste Conference that happened on the Gold Coast last week. Plenty of people was there in attendance, plenty of people learned lots of great stuff and so much happening in that industry. What I wanted to do was just do the recording here so that people who weren't able to make it or people did have any follow-ups or queries or stuff like that we're releasing that out to the public and hopefully be of benefit to others. So my paper was on relation to the role of local government in energy to waste projects and really harnessing in on the journey that a variety of our clients have been on the development of their projects that led to some of the foundation feedstocks on the waste energy plants here in Western Australia. So through the presentation, I'm going to chat through the resource recovery journeys that our clients were on, particularly the regional councils and the member councils associated with that. So regional local government, and also things have evolved from some of the original contract models we looked at for these resource recovery projects. So really looking at reassessing the local government's risk appetite and how that fed into various contract models we looked like. Of course, there's been a lot of advancements in the world of waste energy, and the facilities here in Western Australia have been built on the back of merchant plants with waste supply agreements with local governments. So we'll chat a bit about them and also chat more generally about the role of local government in waste energy projects going forward and what other things, not just waste, that they can assist and help these projects succeed. So as I said before, guys, Talis has been involved in a variety of procurement processes for numerous regional councils over here, for the Eastern Metropolitan Regional Council, the Rivers Regional Council, Mindarie Regional Council, and a variety of other local governments that actually weren't part of regional councils for delivery of waste energy projects. And importantly, we're actually quite proud of our involvement in these projects, but really securing the foundation feedstocks for both the Kwinana and also the East Rockingham projects that then achieve financial close and the waste supply being an important part of it. Throughout the years, particularly travelling east and doing a variety of work across our offices in Brisbane, Newcastle, Nowra, we have always got plenty of questions of why Perth. And so what I wanted to do was just dispel some of the myths that I've seen or people ask me over the years at different conferences or different events of why WA. One thing I have heard is obviously saying that Western Australia had a very strong policy setting in relation to the requirement that you must use waste energy. Well, no, it's actually pretty consistent with the East Coast at this moment in time, as opposed to other parts of the world where there is legislation or policy settings that residual waste needs to be processed through waste energy prior to being landfilled. But that's not the case in Western Australia. So our waste strategy documents, the state waste strategy, we'd like to call them, first commenced in 2012. That really just focused on landfill diversion, so didn't necessarily specify how they wanted us to achieve this diversion from landfill, but just says seek any options that's available. The 2019 state strategy then moved to focus away from landfill diversion, but more prioritise material recovery rates. So simple example of that is maximising recycling and source separation of materials. One of the key ones on that, particularly in the source separation, was the implementation of a FOGO mandate for all local governments in the Perth and Peel region. Now, the latest draft that's out at the moment, and actually the state government is just reviewing the submissions that was put into the draft's consultation strategy, is very similar in the fact that it's still pushing for material recovery rates, but actually it's now changed the terminology to recycling rates, and also to the FOGO mandate has been dropped. So they're still heavily encouraging local governments to go down the FOGO path, but it's not a mandate anymore. So one of the key questions I have got on the East Coast over the years is there a mandate or a policy settings that says we must use waste energy ahead of landfill for the management of residual waste? Well, actually, no, that's not the case. So the state strategy here does talk about the importance of waste to energy and the role it will play in relation to an overall circular economy outcome. However, the messaging is mixed, unfortunately, I would suggest on it. The draft strategy at the moment, which is very similar to the 2019 strategy document, any materials can go to landfill. So there was no specification on what can and can't go to landfill. However, only residual waste following the implementation of better practice source separation and recycling systems can go to waste energy. So we would argue, and we did in our draft submission back to the department, is that's not consistent with the waste hierarchy, is that we should be looking to promote higher levels of the waste hierarchy as opposed to dispose. So by having one set of rules for landfill versus one set of rules for waste energy is an area I think that we can improve on from a policy setting. And importantly too, what better practice source separation recycling systems is very well understood for MSW, for municipal solid waste, and what local governments would need to do. However, it's not well defined on C&I. And that is a problem that we've been trying to work through, as in what does that look like for C&I, such a broad sector. So as I said, there's some mixed messages in relation to the role of waste energy in the strategy. And we believe it could be a lot stronger. And you can see here in the diagrams here is the draft consultation strategy for 2024 has energy recovery outside of the circular loop beside landfill disposal, and we don't think that's accurately reflective of the role that waste energy will play and energy recovery will play in the circular economy. So you can have a look at Talis's image there and our interpretation of what that circular economy looks like, and importantly, the role that energy recovery plays in the overall resource recovery landfill diversion strategy. Levies is another key one to be here about. But I believe you guys got very high levies. No, on this graph you can see, sadly, Western Australia is the bottom of the pile in relation to landfill levies. So from a regulatory perspective on our financial drivers, which obviously landfill levies are well understood across the world in relation to the important role that they do to make sure that waste will not just go to the cheapest solution. And actually levies there driving up and encouraging investment in recycling and resource recovery infrastructure. So sadly, West Australia is the bottom of the pile, and basically at this moment in time, about half that of our eastern states counterparts, Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria in particular. So the strategy is not particularly strong on waste energy. The levies are not particularly a strong advocate for why we actually have these waste facilities either. However, there was some great work done by the department in relation to commissioning WSP to do an independent assessment of the performance, the environmental and health implications of waste energy technologies. So this work was done in 2013 and it was commissioned by the Waste Authority, and it was there to support the various approval authorities, the EPA and the DWR at the time, that were assessing applications for waste energy projects. And the concept was well, guys, those officers hadn't necessarily assessed waste energy applications before they went as familiar with that technology versus other waste and recycling technologies we have in Western Australia, but also to even compared to mine sites and stuff like that. So there's a lot of unknowns in relation to these projects, and therefore the independent assessment was to look at what lessons can we learn from elsewhere in the world where waste energy has been applied. So the Waste Authority commissioned this work, and credit to them to getting this work done, because we had a variety of environmental approval authorities, the EPA, the DWR, and also some planning officers as well, assessing applications of waste energy projects. And really, they were unknown because there's no other reference sites in Australia. But of course, there is so many reference sites all across the world, particularly in Europe, Japan, so on and so forth. So plenty of developed countries which have a high reliance on waste energy technology. So great piece of work done, really strong regulatory setting to help with those projects. The work was commissioned under 3 reports. The legislative framework, so how the legislative framework here in Western Australia can be used to support these projects, i.e. does it sit well within the legislative framework we have. The second part of the works was a case study, so they looked at a variety of waste energy technologies and projects all across the world and how they actually worked and what potential impacts they might have had in their environments. And then of course the last one was really focusing on the environmental and health implications of waste energy technologies. Arising from these works, waste energy technology was proven to be safe. That was the overall key finding. particularly in relation to proven technologies, sited in the right locations, performance standards that were applied, particularly in relation to emissions and reporting. So those works put forward 21 recommendations on those key aspects that were then carried across into the actual overall approval conditions associated with the various waste energy projects. But a really, really important piece of work, and a resource that's available online, and we put a link up here that anyone across Australia can actually get access to these reports. Really, really important aspects. So that's a bit of the background, but now I actually want to speak now more is on the resource recovery journeys that our clients were on. So Eastern Metropolitan Regional Councils, Mindarie Regional Council, and also Rivers Regional Council, and myself and John King, many people in the audience may know, before Talis was born, we were working at Cardinal, and we were working with these councils back for many, many decades on their desire to actually look to maximise the diversion of materials away from landfills. At that time, these councils had a good understanding of the opportunity lost that we have, unfortunately, with landfills, and also too the cost implications of landfills. So many of them operated landfills and understood the externalities that weren't necessarily being captured in the overall gate fees. So we started a long process looking at various resource recovery options, and some of this work would predate the state waste strategies that I spoke about in the previous slides. The first one of them being 2012. We were working on these resource recovery journeys with our clients well before that, and particularly in John's instance, many decades before that. And as part of the work, though, we looked at a variety of options. So we looked at source separation of various materials, such as organics, such as FOGO collections. So at that time, they weren't necessarily called FOGO collections. We looked at recovering organics from residual waste streams or mixed waste streams. So what on the East Coast is referred to as mixed waste organic outputs. We also looked at energy recovery as well, and also a combination of all those various options, various technology options, various site locations, so on and so forth. And of course, as part of any sort of project like that, we looked at a variety of the ownership models or contract delivery models for it. So a design and construct model, a build, own, operate, transfer sort of model, and other sorts of PPP, so public-private partnership models, so where they have shared ownership between ourselves and the private industry. And also an important part of this journey was also where those regional councils were at that stage. Eastern Metropolitan Regional Council, or EMRC, had sites, numerous sites, Red Hill and Hazelmere, and had approvals across those sites for various different types of technologies and infrastructure. Rivers Regional Council, which was a very small administration at that stage, and they had no sites actually that they owned at that time, although there was discussions about various sites that they could get access to if they needed to, if they wanted to build a facility. And also the Mindarie Regional Council, of course, they had an MWU facility operating up at Neerabup at that time, and also they had Smalla Park landfill, which was still substantial void space, but known that there was an infinite time frame on it, and they were moving towards planning for the closure of that facility. So all those regional councils were at different parts of the journey. A key one I do speak to the East Coast about was the regional collaboration that West Australia had, which is slightly different, I think, in some instances to that of the East Coast. Now, Talis is a great advocate for regional collaboration. Obviously, Talis as a broad team, there's plenty of international experience, and in many parts of the world, we understand that regional collaboration is a legislative requirement, such as in Ireland, where I've spent a lot of my life working. There's actually requirements for those local governments to work together in regional groups to make sure they get the best outcome for their waste. And here in Western Australia, obviously there's been regional councils have been strong for many, many decades now. And what that brought with the key benefit was consolidation of waste tonnages. So through one single tender that led to a single contract, you could have significant volumes of waste being put on the table, and from multiple participants, so multiple LGAs, and we were able to bring that waste feedstock to the table and offer that out to private sector or any other parties that wanted to actually put forward a proposed solution for us. So obviously there's major benefits there by just economies of scales and consolidation of tonnage. But there is, of course, challenges with it. In Western Australia, there's no legislative requirement that councils need to work in regional councils or the regional collaboration. And of course, with that, so it's optional for councils to be involved. And with that, sometimes internal politics or particular local government's views can be challenging. And then maintaining that commitment and that agreement and that shared vision, again, with so many parties involved and also with councillors involved, can be troublesome and a lot of work put in that areas from time to time. Also, too, is just looking at a governance model. So, regional councils need to have a governance structure, and that brings additional resources, costs, and time frame implications to the whole process. Plenty of challenges, but a lot of them have been overcome well over the years, particularly by the hard work of the various member councils and also the regional councils who had a shared vision. But things have changed, I would suggest, in relation to the delivery of resource recovery projects here in Western Australia. So, back in the day, we had a variety of MWO, so mixed waste organic output, so where we were actually going into the residual waste stream and trying to retrieve the organics output. There was a variety of projects delivered on that. There was a D&C contract that was operated by one of the regional councils. There was a PPP project delivered for Mindarie, and a variety of other regional councils were looking at a variety of other models as well. So there's a lot of work done in those areas. But Talis, from our view of the world, is that we see that there's been a change in the desire for the level of ownership from regional councils and also local governments for these types of projects. What we've actually even seen, even in simple terms, is that I think we've seen local government particularly look to the private sector more and more to assist with the delivery of their waste services, even down to collections nowadays. Recycling, processing, all done by the private sector over here. So I think there's been a bit of mentality and a change, particularly in the metropolitan area where you have options available to you, is rely more on the private sector to provide these services as opposed to do it in-house. So we've definitely seen a change in that sort of desire for the level of ownership and involvement in these projects. What we've also seen too is then, as opposed to some of those original resource recovery projects, those MWIL facilities, so there was a change in relation to contingency liabilities and those being applied then to the balance sheets for the local governments and the regional councils, which really hindered their financing ability for other types of projects, which didn't necessarily happen with the original projects we had here in Western Australia. So that was a very big change. Also, too, there was some war wounds along the way. Waste infrastructure delivery is complex. It can be expensive. There was some war wounds along the way for some of the regional councils where, things didn't happen that they weren't overly happy with, be it the regional councils or the member councils, and of course some politics got involved as well. So those were some challenges too where, how heavily involved do we really want to be on the process and the ownership of these facilities? Governance costs can be expensive. We know that from our regional councils really saying that 10% of the overall operational costs of their waste facility was down to the governance costs alone, which as opposed to the private sector, that wasn't going to be there. So they're very attuned and mindful of that. But also too, a very important part of this whole process and their journey is that the Kwinana and East Rockingham waste energy facilities, although at that time were called slightly different things, those projects were born in the late noughties, right? And they were going as merchant plant facilities. They were just putting their hand up, said, we want to deliver a facility here. We just need tonnages. Local governments, regional councils, please give it to us. So that was also a really change in the market too, where we had private sector saying, we're going to build something, just give us waste and we'll deliver it. And so that really had a change in the mindsets for the councils too, of actually how they actually want to deliver that project. And with those merchant plants, made us go back to the drawing board and really think about reassessing the roles and the risks that local governments and regional council wants to take on these resource recovery projects. So the merchant plant model was then devised around that time for these resource recovery projects. Now, importantly, Talis always refers to this as the old model, but a new use. So merchant plants facilities are abundant across the waste sector already. One of the best examples we can give for that is our commingled recycling, of course, in our yellow lidded bin. Those materials will be collected by local government and brought to MRF, a materials recovery facility, for processing. And they're generally, the vast majority in relation to PER contracts would be as a merchant plant sort of arrangement. We bring waste to you, you process it, and you look after it from there. So really, we really looked at that similar sort of model there. So as we said, old model, but a new use. So a key one on it too is obviously what we thought was, a very attractive part of that model, or the merchant plant model, was really the ownership of risk. So where are we actually placing the risk? And who's best to manage that risk? And that's how we should be doing it with any sort of contract, because if we put risk onto someone's plate who they can't manage, with that, the contractor is going to up their rates, or the local government is going to be left carrying something that is going to struggle to actually properly understand or manage and mitigate those risks. Also, a very important part of the whole process too is really harnessing the expertise of the private sector, and particularly waste to energy, where there is not so much national or domestic knowledge at this moment. Well, sorry, at that time, of course, things have seriously evolved with the two new plants in Western Australia. But a lot of that knowledge just came from Europe, the UK, and particularly where we actually got these large organisations who were able to bring that expertise to the domestic market and help the delivery of these projects. The matrix we have here on the presentation here, you can see where the green middle column is for the regional councils and local government's responsibilities, and then the yellow is for the actual contractor on a merchant plant model. So what we're actually saying here on the merchant plant model, and this is what we use for the two waste energy projects here in Western Australia, and a variety of waste supply agreements we prepared for them. Local government's responsibilities associated with the procurement phase of the project, i.e. bringing their waste to the table and to the market and releasing it to get offers back. They had to do that anyway. It's a bread and butter piece of work for them. Local governments are procuring services and infrastructure day in, day out. And the other one that they have responsibility on is obviously waste supply. But I would say waste supply is actually one of their core strengths. It's going out there, collecting rubbish on a daily basis, and then bring it to a location. Now, local governments have done that for many, many decades and will continue to do so for many, many decades. So I would say waste supply is actually one of their core strengths. And that's where the responsibility sits. And in the merchant plant model, then the contractor looks after the project planning, the approvals, the financing, technology, getting it built, getting it operating, and looking after the products and residues. So that's the merchant plant model. And as I said, very similar to how we operate in material recovery facilities. However, more complex in relation to technology, more complex in relation to the approvals, and also more complex in relation to financial implications of these projects. So waste supply agreements have evolved over time. So when we first, Rivers Regional Council was the first council to put out a waste supply agreement, and which happened in 2013. And at that time, the two waste energy plants were there saying, we want to look after your residual waste, give it to us, we'll process it. And they were obviously hunting for foundation feedstocks at the time. That contract at the time was a fixed annual quantity. Now, as I said earlier on, at that time, there was no mandate for FOGO within Western Australia, and the strategy document was really focused on maximising landfill diversion. It wasn't necessarily prioritising material recovery rates as opposed to landfill diversion rates. Things have definitely evolved since then, and we are now preferring a waste horizons contract. And that's a model we've used on numerous contracts since then. And we do get a lot of questions on what does actually waste horizon mean. It basically means we're not committing to a tonnage, we're committing them to what is the content of our bin. So for a residual waste stream, we're committing to give them exclusivity that you're the only one who will receive our residual waste stream. So we're not saying how much tonnage is going to be in there. We're also not even saying what type of waste that's in there in relation to composition. We're not committing to anything on waste composition. We're just going to give you what's actually in the bin. Now, that's a great contract model because it really also supports the local governments to continue on their journey to get further waste avoidance, and also implement new recycling initiatives, such as if you don't have FOGO but you want to bring it on in a couple of years' time, fine, let's do that. Because what is allowing us is then to chase other initiatives higher up the waste hierarchy. That means we're reducing the amount that we're actually going to be selling to waste energy. And over the years, we looked at a variety of different models in relation to a waste horizon contracts. One of the ones is we looked at is committed waste tonnages versus non-committed waste tonnages. So some of our regional councils we've looked at is that some of the member councils were really keen to use the waste energy, others were not. So some of the councils were committed, so they were definitely in, and the others were non-committed waste tonnages. So the idea being at a later stage that they may be able to enter the contract and actually avail of those waste energy services. But that is going to be subject to the actual contractor having capacity and availability within their waste energy facility. And of course, these waste energy facilities need to operate at near close to, let's just say, 90% of their actual total maximum capacity. So non-committed tonnages could be added later on if there was tonnage capacity available at the waste energy plant. We also looked at floor and ceiling models where we actually did have a fixed rate, but there was a floor and a ceiling. So this is the minimum that we're going to give you, and this is the maximum we're going to give you. And we also looked at some contracts. We actually had a combination of both. So we had a fixed rate up until a very low floor, I would say, in relation to a local government. And then there was additional waste that we could bring above that on a waste horizon models. So we've looked at all variety of different sort of contractual arrangements around that. As I said earlier on, but a really, really important part too is with a waste horizon contract or waste supply agreement, we pass back all the waste compositional commitments back to the contractor, as in it's your responsibility, guys. And particularly quite important there too, because we were providing tonnage, which was a very large portion of the overall waste stream, but they were chasing other waste too. It wasn't just a dedicated plant for our waste material. So the waste composition requirements sat back with the contractor. Through the process, obviously, a lot of decisions to be made by local governments about what's the best contract model for them. And we can model things and estimate and quantify and put forward projections of what we think could be the best options for them. But what we've done a lot of late is actually use the tender process to get responses back from the market on a variety of options, which then allow the council to make an informed decision, such as different term lengths, different waste supply, be it waste horizon or a fixed tonnage. So don't be afraid to use your procurement process to get answers to those questions that you believe the councils may be asking for at a later stage as part of their decision-making process. The one thing that we did touch on there was terms of contracts, so long-term contracts. So particularly with the foundation feedstocks, there was a strong desire to get long-term contracts. So on average, they're about 20 years with extensions. Some of the latter clients we work for, including local governments and even regional councils, they've been able to get a shorter term because they actually haven't been the foundation feedstocks. But market does need to have some long-term requirements on tonnages to make these projects bankable. So the foundation feedstock contracts we did for Eastern Metropolitan Regional Council and also Rivers, they were all 20 years plus. And in very important aspects of actually achieving financial close. Waste supply agreements, people ask us too about actually how does it work in relation to what do I bring and what guidance do we need to give the tenderers in relation to what we might get them. So as part of waste supply agreements, we always have a waste delivery plan, which is basically a statement from the councils or council about how much waste they're going to bring and when is it going to come. And it provides estimated tonnages. Again, it's an horizon contract. Will not guarantee a tonnage. We're saying we're going to give you the residual bin. And this is the best information we have to give you guidance on what we might be able to provide. But of course, very importantly, it's for information purposes only. Also, too, there has to be provisions in the contract for non-processable waste. Materials that should not be going into the waste energy plant. Be it a legislative requirement, be it performance standard that in relation to the contractor or how they want to operate the facility. very standard sort of clause we have in there. Gas bottles and things like that. Stuff, nasty stuff we don't need in or want in there. A very important part to need careful consideration as part of waste supply agreements is also the lead times for delivery of these projects, but also facility unavailability. Let's deal with the first bit first. Waste energy projects have long lead time. I remember the facility in Dublin that I first started working on in my first step in my consultancy career. 20 years later, that was built. The West Australia projects, obviously, we did have a global pandemic in the middle of it that did delay things, but of course, very, very long lead times. That was up to 15 years all up from initial project planning works, I'd say. So it can take long time to actually deliver these facilities. They are complex, big construction periods and very large financial investment decisions. So always consider that in the preparation of your waste supply agreements as actually when do I actually need that service by? And also to have provisions in there if things do get delayed or whatever that you can extend. Also too, during the normal operational phase of the project, there will be time that the facility is unavailable due to maintenance, generally a couple of weeks a year. And you got to make sure we have a plan in place about what actually going to happen in there. So important clauses in the contracts. Another very important aspect of the waste supply agreements was for industry was in relation to local governments and their involvement in the regional councils. And if a local government left the regional council or for whatever reason the regional council no longer existed, what would happen to the contract there? And as part of those processes, we learnt about, the need for having novation provisions in the contract, which basically allowed that if a member council or a local government decided to leave a regional council, they still hold a contract with the actual service provider. So that contract could be novated down or up depending on what was happening with the local governments and the regional council at the time. But what we have seen over the years from the works we've done is obviously a greater understanding of how to do business with local government and local government interaction with the businesses. So industry understands more now about local government governance models, how they operate, and also the regulation in relation to, particularly in relation to procurement. The rules around local procurement are very stringent in this country. But also industry understands the role that local government and particularly regional government can play in relation to the assembly of waste tonnages. So actually being able to provide large volumes of waste to the table and use that to support these projects. And of course too, municipal solid waste, which is a very, very consistent waste stream. And also too, industry understand that local governments want to achieve more. We're representing the community. We actually want to have sustainable circular economy and communities that we service, and the very important role that they take and lead the community in achieving and want to achieve more in relation to our waste, be it landfill diversion, be it carbon emissions, so on and so forth. So industry also understands that local government really do want to achieve more. And then on the flip side, local governments now are understanding more about what industry needs for us. Now, obviously, we looked at that risk distribution earlier on, the merchant plants. What's great about the merchant plants is that industry can go operate the facility how they see fit without being dictated to by, third parties who mightn't have the expertise that the industry has. So they understand, and I also too view that they actually also recognise a decreased appetite for local governments to be heavily involved in waste facilities, operations and ownership. I think we've come back, as I said earlier on, things have changed on that front. But local governments understand the requirement for long-term contracts. Now, long-term contracts are something that local governments should not be concerned about in my eyes. Whether we're working for a small rural council anywhere across Australia or a large metropolitan one, we always say if you don't know what you're doing with your residual waste in 10 years' time, you want to start pedaling hard and looking at your options and devising the best solution, because but of course residual waste is going to keep happening, and to make sure we make an informed decision and get a good outcome, we want to make sure we plan well ahead in advance and look at our options and enter contracts or get new facilities up and running, whatever we need to. So having long-term commitments in relation to contracts for the management of residual waste is not something that local governments should be worried about. If anything, it's something you should really have. to make sure you're safeguarding one of your key risks from your operational perspective. Also, too, local governments are understanding more and more about actually how these projects are financed and the role of the financiers, the lenders on the project. So, the big banks around internationally, the very important role that they have in actually delivering these projects and actually writing checks to support these projects, but also their requirements such as financiers deals and agreements between the regional councils and the local governments to make sure they're going to continue to provide their waste. So, there's been definitely some learnings there. We understand that more and more. As we said earlier on too, is that from a local government perspective, and particularly in the merchant plants, they like the concept that let the industry get on and do things as best they see fit. Support them however we can, give them waste, give them support, let them get on and do what they do best without being a hindrance. So we've spoken a lot about waste supply, but also quite importantly, there's a variety of other things the local government can do or regional government can do to support waste energy projects. And this is common for various other types of waste and recycling infrastructure, I would suggest. Local government have good access to land and have ability to be able to secure land and set aside land, also protect land through planning policies and stuff like that to make sure there's not encroachment on these waste facilities. So definitely local government can play a big role in that, in identifying, securing and protecting land for the development of waste infrastructure. They might also need to assist with approvals, so be it environmental approvals, so helping with the regulator. Many projects we worked on, we actually secured a lot of the initial approvals, environmental approvals with the EPA and so on and so forth for a number of our projects. And so they can definitely assist there. They can also assist from a planning perspective. So there's planning approvals that might need to be secured. So always bear in mind how you might be able to assist, even on a merchant plant facility, the development of waste infrastructure through approvals, through support with the approval process. Another way that local government can assist is actually through the use of the products that might be generated from waste energy facilities, such as the power, the heat, steam, or incinerator bottom mash aggregates. So how do we actually take them back and use them? So really playing its role in getting those materials back into the economy and being used, and of course getting kudos there. There's great opportunity for local governments to obtain credits for actually using those materials. They can also assist with the residues management. So one of the projects we're looking at with the looking at how regional council can be involved in the actual management of the APCR, so the air pollution control residue materials. Social license to operate, very, very important aspect of any sort of waste project, but particularly the more complex and the larger scale infrastructure, more and more important. So local governments can definitely play a very big role in assisting private sector secure and maintain the social license operated. Really, really important aspects that local government should really consider how best you can help, particularly because the networks you may have with the community and your access to the community. And also too, supporting with, make sure those drivers are there, those drivers are as strong as possible, such as state government regulation and policy, including the landfill levy. So look where we can look to support these waste projects by actually giving our voice and giving guidance to the state government about what you think should be happening in relation to support structures that are required for these facilities. A good example of how these additional supports can be actually delivered on some of our projects is the work we're actually doing for the City of Wanneroo at present. Last year, we concluded the Nearbup Resource Recovery Precinct for the City of Wanneroo, the master plan for that project. And now we're actually working on the delivery of a lot of the Stage 1 infrastructure. Now, the Nearbup Resource Recovery Precinct is basically going to be the key waste precinct in the northern suburbs. So the idea that it will definitely be able to cater for the waste from the City of Wanneroo, but also from surrounding LGAs as well, and also commercial waste generators. And there's a variety of waste infrastructure elements to it. It has a community recycling centre. It has a waste transfer station. It's going to have a materials recovery facility as well. And they're all part of the stage 1 development works. Also in the future, we're going to have a waste energy facility. Now, we're saying that's probably going to be hopefully operational by 2040, but a significant amount of time before actually works is really going to commence on that. We also have, and that's on the southern portion of the facility, and then the northern portion of the facility, of the precinct. There's a concept is we're going to have a variety of service lots that private sector can come in and use and avail of and develop for their own needs. So be it mattress recycling, tire recycling, glass processing, you name it. There'll be land made available for industry to come and develop various types of waste infrastructure. And the idea being that some of the waste accepted on the other parts of the facility is used as feedstock to support those other future initiatives. So as part of this, as we said earlier on, how else can local government assist with the delivery of waste infrastructure? Obviously, got waste supply. So, of course, for the waste energy facility here, we're talking about, yes, we're going to supply tonnage. And also we're talking to our near neighbours about how we can get more and more volume there. But also, too, the Wanneroo is looking at, can we take the power from the waste energy plant to actually power the rest of the precinct? So the material recovery facility, the community recycling centre and the future northern lots, can they be powered from behind the meter power connections back to the waste energy plant? So full circular loop. The IBA, the incinerator bottom ash aggregates, can we use that then? Can the city use that in their construction projects? So really looking at that. Also, we're looking at immediately about how we can actually assist with the approval processes. So not necessarily for the waste energy plant at present, but we are looking about the material recovery facility. The city's looking at going off and securing the town planning and also the works approval for the materials recovery facility, which will be operated by the private sector. So that's a perfect example of, and also very importantly, we've identified this land. We have secured this land and we're going to protect this land by particularly in relation to residential encroachment to make sure we maintain strong buffers from this land, because this facility, we believe, is going to be a very, very important part for the waste infrastructure of the northern suburbs for a very long period of time. So that's a good example of what the City of Wanneroo are doing and also how they're trying to support the development of waste infrastructure in their community. So just a recap of the presentation I've given. Look, the waste energy facilities here in Western Australia were underpinned by the waste supply agreements by the regional councils, the foundation feedstocks. And as I said, we were involved in some of those initial projects and worked on 3 or 4 more with other councils, but weren't necessarily the foundation feedstocks. Here in Western Australia, we've seen more of a preference for the merchant plant model, where we let private sector deliver the waste infrastructure and we provide them with waste. And one of the key risks associated with that is just, as I said, waste supply. That's one of our core strengths as local government. We're doing it for decades and we'll continue to do it for decades. The waste supply agreements have been born here in Western Australia for the waste energy plants, and they've evolved. And they will continue to evolve as well, because, just give smart thinking in relation to how we actually are going to be giving our commitments on these projects. And the waste arising is obviously key to providing flexibility. So allowing local governments to continue on their focus to minimise waste generation and also look to maximise recovery and recycling higher up the waste hierarchy as opposed to waste energy. Also considered how else we can support these waste energy projects, with the perfect example being the work that the City of Wanneroo are doing at the moment on the Nearbuck Resource Recovery Precinct. So that's the presentation, guys. It was great to have the opportunity to provide the paper I gave at the Waste Energy Conference in Gold Coast last week. It's a great conference. Great to see so many people so actively involved in the waste energy field and trying to promote it as best we can. If you got any questions or queries in relation to the presentation or experience with waste supply agreements or any assistance you guys might need, please don't hesitate to get in contact with myself, and we can collaborate with any of our offices in Perth, Brisbane, Newcastle or Nowra and assist you guys on your resource recovery journeys. All the best. Thank you.